Okay, I think we'll get started. So hello everyone, my name is Christine. Bonjour, je m'appelle Christine. My pronouns are she, her, and elle. And I'm the moderator for this session entitled Arsenic and the Book Trade, a Toxic Relationship. I'm moderating today from Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation. However, I recognize that you may be joining from a different place. And as such, I encourage you to learn more about the Indigenous peoples, lands, and waters nearby you by consulting native-land.ca. I'll put that link in the chat after this portion. This session is being recorded and closed captioning has been enabled. And I ask that you please reduce your streaming quality and keep your camera off while not presenting or interacting with others. All in attendance are subject to the Forum Code of Conduct, and the session will be 20 minutes long, followed by a 10-minute question and answer period. At that time, participants will be welcome to ask questions. You can use the Zoom chat function for informal exchange and the Q&A feature for questions that you want to direct at the presenter. We also have a Padlet if you want to ask anonymous questions, and I'll put the link to that in the chat after as well. If you experience any technical difficulties during the session, you can send me a direct message on Zoom, or you can send us an email at lib-forum@concordia.ca. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Kim and Robin to share their presentation. Thank you.
There we go. I think we're almost ready, Kim.
Oh.
There we go.
Hi, I'm Kim Bell, and I am pleased to be sharing our research on arsenical books found in the W.D. Jordan Rare Books and Special Collections Library. This afternoon, I'm going to talk about the goals of the project, a bit of the history around arsenic use in the production of books, and how we selected items for testing. My colleague Robin will take you through the XRF testing process, an analysis and summary of the data, and we will finish up with what this means for our collections and the next steps. In undertaking this project, we had three main goals. First, building on the work done by conservator Dr. Melissa Tadone of the Winter Tour Museum, Garden, and Library in Delaware, we wanted to use portable XRF to identify books in the collection that tested positive for arsenic. Secondly, our goal was to contribute our findings to the larger Poison Book Project database that has come out of the research that was done by Melissa. And lastly, we wanted to develop recommendations and a safety plan to deal with the risks associated with handling this material. Before I get into our work, I want to provide a bit of background on the Poison Book Project, led by Melissa and Dr. Rosie Grayburn. The project began in 2019 with the identification of a friable toxic pigment on a book that was about to go on exhibit at the library. This discovery led to the identification of other items in the Winter Tour collection that contain toxic pigments. It led to the creation of the database that I mentioned earlier, and to the development of procedures and best practices around the safe handling and storage of arsenical books. On the screen is the Poison Book Wiki, maintained by Winter Tour, and this page provides a wealth of information, including a link to the database of known volumes that institutions are encouraged to contribute to. Our Poison Book story at Jordan began, as many things do these days, with a post on social media. Back in 2018, I posted this cover of At the North Pole on the Jordan Instagram account. And I should add, for those that perhaps don't know, Green Bindings have their own tag on Thursdays, which is Green Publishers Binding Thursday. So every Thursday, I posted Green Publishers Bindings like this one. In December of 2018, however, there was a comment from a follower, an artist in the US, asking if it contained arsenic. So this wasn't something we had considered within our collections at Jordan. And from that moment on, our project was born. And comments continue to come in on our green bindings and foredges as knowledge of arsenical books from the 19th century continues to grow. The other image on the slide shows a foredge that followers immediately identified as potentially containing emerald green. When looking at the 19th century, anything bright green is typically a red flag that the item contains arsenic. Arsenic was found in everything from clothing to wallpaper, as seen in the one image on the slide, to insecticides and bookcloth. Emerald green is the name used to identify copper arsenic, which was first created around 1800 and began being used commercially in 1814. It was discovered in Schweinfurt, Bavaria, and is sometimes called Schweinfurt green, Paris green, Vienna green, or King's green. I do want to point out that emerald green is different and reacts differently from other compounds, like the arsenic-rich paint that has been identified on some 16th and 17th century bindings, and Scheele's green, which was created in 1775. And as you can see from the cartoon on the slide, the arsenic waltz, published in Punch magazine in 1862, the dangers of arsenic were well known. Prior to the 19th century, books were mostly bound in leather, vellum, or paper. Bookbinding had remained much the same since Gutenberg's time in the 15th century. But an increasingly literate public and the demand for large quantities of inexpensive books, coupled with some technological advances, led to the invention of bookcloth, a durable fabric that could be colored and stamped with eye-catching designs and colors to attract buyers. So it's these books, the publisher's bindings, that we were interested in testing in our collection. So how did we go about selecting items for testing? First, since the Instagram post in 2018, I had created a database of suspected arsenical books in the Jordan collection. These were books that had come to our attention one way or another, and they were the starting point. But these items represented only a fraction of our collection. So we also compared the Poison Book Project database, which identifies items that have tested positive against our holdings. Any that had a green binding or foredge were included in our items for testing. And ultimately, armed with an emerald green bookmark, also courtesy of the Poison Book Project, Robin, and Vanessa, a technician at Jordan, and myself went through the shelves, starting with the children's collection, which we know has a large number of publishers' bindings, doing a visual inspection of the bindings. Eventually, we moved our search into the rest of the collections held at Jordan. We didn't pull all green bindings, only the ones that matched colors found on the bookmark and that fell within the date range of 1820 to 1900. We also expanded our search to include green paper bindings, which tend to have an earlier publishing date, bright green foredges, and end papers. On the slide, you can see the Winter Tour bookmark and me comparing the bookmark to books on the shelves and books in the conservation lab for identification purposes. Also visible on the slide is the Poison Book Project database. During the selection process, we also found some end papers. On the screen, you can see emerald green end papers that Robin found quite by accident when she pulled out a book and caught a glimpse of the brilliant end papers in the book next to it. In looking at the cataloging record for this item, we learned that it was part of a gift, and we were able to then look at other items included in the gift to see if they had similar end papers. One item did and also tested positive for arsenic. Interestingly, this book was formerly in the Royal Library in Naples and is embossed with the Royal Bourbon coat of arms, which is visible on the red leather binding. After testing this first group of items, we did expand our search to the Engineering Science Library and the main Humanities and Social Sciences Library. By this point, we were able to visually identify items without the use of the bookmark, generally dismissing the darker hued bindings. Due to a shortage of time and the sheer size of the collections, we also targeted our search to classification areas that we had success with in the first round of testing, which were the DAs, the Ps, and the Qs, keeping within the 1820 to 1900 date range. In the picture, Robin is standing with a book truck of green bindings selected during the first round. And now I'm going to pass it over to Robin to talk about the XRF testing, our findings, and next steps. Robin, over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Kim. And as Kim previously mentioned, emerald green is a compound composed of both copper and arsenic. To detect these elements, conservators and conservation scientists can use an analytical technique called X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy, or XRF. XRF is a widely used technology and is used heavily by geologists to analyze rock, soil, and sediment samples, and by engineers in the construction industry, where it can determine the compositions of metal alloys and cement. XRF is also heavily used in the field of conservation, as it is not a non-destructive technique. That is, we can safely characterize elements present in a book's covering material without having to remove any sample material or cause changes to the original. In order to use an XRF analyzer in Canada, you must hold an operator's certificate, which is obtained by completing a training requirement and then successfully passing a written exam. This is administered by Natural Resources Canada. To build our methodology to test our green books, we relied heavily upon the fantastic work that's already been published by Melissa Tidone and Rosie Grayburn from the Art Conservation Program at Winterthur at the University of Delaware, and with consultation from Timothy Greening, an archaeological scientist from Parks Canada. The library is also very fortunate to partner with the Queen's University Department of Art Conservation, as we were able to borrow the program's portable XRF on a few occasions to conduct our analysis. So to briefly explain how XRF technology works, I'd like everyone to think back to high school chemistry course. This might be a traumatic event for some, but just imagine an atom. You know, it has a nucleus and the electrons that are kind of circling around it. So XRF technology works by directing a small amount of X-rays at a sample. The sample is affected when the X-rays reach an electron that's found near the nucleus. The X-ray causes this inner electron to be ejected or knocked away. The atom at this point becomes unstable. So to stabilize itself, an electron from an outer orbital comes in to save the day. It jumps in and it fills the opening there. And when this happens, a photon of light or fluorescence is emitted. And because each atom in the periodic table has a characteristic wavelength of fluorescence, when the XRF captures the wavelength, it generates a spectra which we can use to determine the specific elements present. Our general XRF setup was very simple, as we were lucky that the materials we were working with were stable and did not exhibit any condition issues that would hinder our ability to safely test them. We used the Brucker Tracer 5i, which was, as previously mentioned, loaned to us by the Art Conservation Department, and it was set up on the desktop stand with the sample stage accessory placed on top. This allowed us to gently place the books upon the sample stage, and they were fully supported while testing was taking place. The Tracer 5i also features an internal sample camera, which we use to identify the measurement positions. This was very useful when analyzing books with large amounts of gold blocking or books with significant surface abrasions, as it allowed us to find a good spot of green. And just to put this image into context, the circled sample area is 8 millimeters in diameter. And to analyze the results, we use the Brucker Artax software to examine the resulting spectra. The spectra for each book is presented in a graph with peaks that correspond to specific elements. The resulting spectra for this children's book is shown here, with high peaks present that correspond with copper and arsenic. And I'd really like to acknowledge the contribution of Timothy Greening again for providing expert guidance on the spectral analysis for this project. So we had some really interesting results that I'd love to share with you now. Of the 90 total books that were tested, we have strong evidence to suggest that 13 of those titles contain significant spectral peaks where copper and arsenic were found together. This worked out to be about 14% of books selected for testing. The dates on these books range between 1819 through to 1870. And while we were hoping to find a Canadian publisher example, we didn't find one. However, we did identify books published in England, Ireland, Scotland, Italy, and the United States. 3 titles were part of the Stopper Library circulating collection and have since been removed from circulation. 5 of the 13 titles identified were cased in bookcloth. For several of these titles, the bookcloth on the spines had faded to a dull brownish color, as seen here in this example of the life of Gerald Griffin. 5 titles were cased in paper, including this novel that was in the circulating collection. But not just covering material tested positive. In this case, the stained green foredge contained copper and arsenic. And 2 titles were identified that had arsenical end papers. These books had the same provenance and were both formerly owned by an Italian noble family, as Kim had previously mentioned. And interestingly, 2 of the paper-covered books seen here had high amounts of arsenic present, but the amount of copper was many times more than expected for emerald green. This suggests that the books received their green color perhaps from a different copper-based pigment, for example, copper carbonate, and not copper acetoarsenite. This means that the arsenic present could be due to a pesticide treatment sometime in the past. Further analysis of these 2 titles will be conducted to explore this conclusion. In our next steps, we'll be following up very shortly with the larger Poison Book Project to share our results so that the newly discovered arsenical titles can be added to the database. We will also be finalizing our internal recommendations and policies as how we will be storing the arsenical books moving forward. We've had some discussions and are favoring separating them from the rest of the collection material, placing them in polyethylene zipper bags, and placing the collection on their own shelf. This would aid in any potential, but hopefully never needed, emergency disaster response and recovery. By knowing the exact location of the arsenical titles, we would be able to pinpoint health hazards in this way for emergency responders. We also need to add labeling to the location where they are stored, including item level labels, such as labels placed onto the storage bags, and catalog identifiers to ALMA to ensure researchers and library staff are aware of potential handling hazards prior to their access. We know that there are bound green ledgers as well at the Queen's University Archives, especially in the City of Kingston collection. We're working toward further exploration of these, and the archives opens a whole new venue of potentially toxic 19th century materials. We will continue to expand partnerships and work with others in Canada to examine their own collections, and we're excited to be working with the Toronto Public Library this upcoming summer. We will also continue our advocacy and public outreach to make librarians and the public aware of potentially toxic books in their collections. And we will work towards securing additional funding so we can begin to look at other potentially harmful pigments used in 19th century bindings, such as lead chromate. Kim and I have many people to thank for contributing to this research. We'd like to especially thank Rosaline Hill, Natasha Kuzmanovich, and Timothy Greening for lending their time and expertise, Lindsay Sisson and Caitlin Hallchurch, for their knowledgeable support, Vanessa Sellex for her enthusiasm at tracking down green titles, to the Queen's University Department of Art Conservation for their willingness to collaborate with us, and all of the staff at the W.D. Jordan Rare Books and Special Collections for their support. And lastly, we'd like to acknowledge the Samuel H. Kress Foundation, Bader Philanthropies, and the Jaroslawski Foundation, for without whose generous funding, this research could not have happened. Finally, thank you to the Library Research Forum, the organizing committee, and all of you for listening in today. It's been a pleasure being able to share our research with you. I know I had a wonderful time. It was a very interesting project. Please feel free to reach out to Kim or myself in the future. And now we'd love to answer your questions.
Thank you both so much for sharing your research with us. I see we have a question in the Q&A first, and then a hand that has been raised. So let's try, if it's okay with you, the Q&A question first. Can you folks see it on your end?
Yeah, the question is, did you happen to find any of the books that were identified in the Poison Book Project database in the Jordan collection as well? If so, did you also identify them as being made with emerald green?
Yes.
Yeah.
We did. We had quite a few, but we had 4 from the database that we did identify as having emerald.
Thank you. And now I see that there is a hand raised. Rosa, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, I actually have a question. Because a lot of the binding would have been done as a custom binding. So then I guess when you consult the Poison Book Project database and verify if the book is in your stacks, you may just have a different binding for that particular edition of the book. So then it might be one-off copies or copies that are coming from specific binders, right? As well, it may not be just the book that's, you know, it might have been just redone, or the binding might have just been redone. I was just thinking that went through. I don't know.
It could be, but
yeah,
we were focusing on publishers' bindings, which are case bindings, and so they were identical, and they were done in large batches. But they did use different bindings for sure, even for the same titles and within the same publisher. Yes, so there could be. We did some of the ones from the database that we checked against our holdings, same publisher, but you know, maybe a brown binding and not a green one. So definitely happens, yes.
And it's curious that you didn't find any Canadian books, so maybe we just didn't have whoever were the publishers or the printers in Canada in that period of time may not have had access to that kind of binding material. So, or the emerald green paper and whatnot. It's interesting. It's great. I like the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, we do still hope we will find a Canadian publisher.
I think there's probably some out there. Just, you know, our limited collection probably just didn't have one, or we haven't found it
yet.
Thank you. So we've got a few questions in the Q&A and a hand. I suppose, you're still able to see the Q&A, so could you maybe see Larry's questions about disposal first?
Sure. Yeah, so the question is, if you decide not to retain something, are there guidelines for safe disposal?
I don't think so yet.
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
It's basically the same stuff as rat poison. So you know, so you might want to keep that in mind.
And I think the next question was John or Jay Latour.
Oh, sure. Without trying to sound alarmist, is it possible for arsenic to transfer from one emerald green book cover to another book cover on the library shelves? I think so, probably in minute amounts. If there were any kind of abrasion happening or things like that. It is something that I think is more concern if you're touching the book yourself with your own hands, or perhaps it's been wet or something like that. There's a lot more, I think, what's the right word, Kim? There's a lot more concern, I think, if the book has been in like direct contact with you and not touching something else.
And I suppose a good follow-up question to that is the next one in the chat. What are the detrimental health effects that would happen if someone was exposed to a toxic book?
I'm not sure studies have been done on bookcloth. As far as I know, no one's died from arsenical books. They certainly died from other products that had arsenic in them. But I think it is the long-term exposure. So perhaps skin issues, rashes, and also lung conditions, I think. But I'm not aware of any studies yet that have been done.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So I see one more question in the chat and a hand. I'm not sure if you were able to answer Danielle's question before the hand.
Sure. Well, the next question is, will you bring the XRF to the Toronto Public Library, or will they send you the books? I think I saw some kind of fume hood in one of the images. Yeah, so while we worked within the fume hood, it wasn't on at the time. We actually have a ductless fume hood in our lab, our conservation lab here at Queen's Library. That just was the best place for us to set everything up. So it just so happened that it was in the fume hood at the time. But yes, the Toronto Public Library will bring their books here and we will test them in the conservation lab at the art conservation program. So that's the plan.
Thank you. And now the hand has disappeared, but I hope the person who had it is able to.
I think it was Timothy Greening. Maybe he's left.
No, I see the hand again. Timothy.
Okay. Here.
Oh, hello. The Zoom call crashed on me, of course, and I had to exit the meeting right when the questions were getting interesting.
Oh no.
Yeah, so I missed a couple minutes, but I'm back. I just have to congratulate you on a great presentation, very informative and lovely graphics. So my question is, can you quickly give a overview of the political landscape and how people react to your findings and how you have found instigating the new policies, educating staff, and dealing with, for example, books now have to be pulled out of circulation because of the results, and how all that's been received and going forward to continue staff education on the topic. That was many questions.
Kim, how do we answer that, Kim?
So they're just finding out now that we removed them. No, so we haven't we haven't really started the education part of it. We've really just sort of wrapped up our testing, or these 2 rounds of testing, and are really just finalizing our policies. So I don't think we're going to have any issues. When we have talked about it, people are quite interested in it. and in the work, and the fact that we have arsenical books in our collection. So I don't expect any backlash.
Yeah, it is kind of like a curiosity, I think, for most people here in the library at this point. They're kind of excited to see how many we have, and just I think what that means for our collections anyway is that we can just keep reminding people, if you are touching any collections materials here, like you should be washing your hands like immediately afterwards, you know. And I think this just kind of reinforces that, like kind of what people kind of already know.
Great. Looking forward to hearing more about that political stuff, and maybe, you know, frankly, different institutions will bring about the policy shifts in different ways. It's something I'm interested in seeing how that goes.
Definitely.
Yes, thank you. That was a great question.
Absolutely. I see we have one more question in the chat. If you'd like to answer that before we close out. Oh, I suppose it's in the Q&A. It is.
Oh, it's in the Q&A?
Would digitization be recommended if safe procedures could be developed?
I'm not sure. I don't know if we have at Queen's here like digitization policy for that type of material, but it might be worth also considering adding something to the digitization policy that talks about potentially harmful collections materials.
But that's something to think about. Yeah, we haven't really thought about digitizing.
Yeah, thanks, Wendy, very much for that question.
So thank you both so much again for sharing your research with us. This is really fascinating stuff, and I look forward to seeing how your research continues and develops in this area. I think we're going to close with that. If anyone has follow-up questions for you, they have your contact information on the screen there. And I want to thank you again. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.